let's move into one of our last categories. We can refer to this as close quarter threats. Someone may, before he attacks in one of the other ways that we've been discussing in training, he may decide to threaten you first, come in close quarters and threaten you with one of the objects, a shank, possibly glass if he's holding it over his head. From here, if you don't diffuse that situation, one of the other attacks can begin and it's going to be more unpredictable. So let's look at some of the defenses we can do for close quarter threats. All right, one of the last sections we're going to do here is now weapon threats. This is both kind of wrapping things up, and also it would be a natural transition to later weapon defenses where people are carrying more orthodox weapons and they're planning ahead, robberies, armed robberies, muggings, things like that. But what I want to make clear is statistically it's quite common for someone to threaten you before they attack you with the weapon. So if you have a chance to do it early, that's a good thing. But many times the person gets you into a position where you're not able to. Jiu-jitsu and other martial arts have a lot of good defenses. If the person's holding the weapon in front of you here, you know, some are better than others, but they have wrist locks and the elbow locks and things like that. And those are contained both in combat sambo and in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. The problem is when we get into a situation where the person takes all your space away. So maybe they're threatening you here more like this. At this point, the traditional wrist lock and stuff won't work very well, and I'll talk about why. Now we're going to use a training blade here, but this could just as easily be a fork. It could be someone threatening your eye, like that is very common with the pencils that we talked about earlier. So I just want to show you a way to bridge that gap between the defenses you can do when there's more space between you and this one I designed specifically for this situation. Let me show you what I'm talking about. He's got a pencil or a fork and he's jamming me with it. Now, the other traditional ones assume that when my hands come up, the weapon is on this side of them. Pull the weapon back. So in this situation, you've got your wrist locks, you've got your elbow locks, things like that. But once he jams me, and number one, the weapon is behind my hand, so I'd have to do this kind of thing, and I've got no place to go. So this is the kind of thing that can happen when you're against a wall, the guy's threatening your eye, whatever. Remember, we're using a training blade, but we're imagining it's an improvised weapon. And I can't do the footwork and things like that. Now, it could be an actual blade attack, but again, we're going to be looking at these kind of things a little bit later. But let's look at this context. Now, I don't have the space to work. I could be in this position against a wall, or I could be on the ground, which we'll talk about in future segments about ground defense and grappling with weapons. But the idea here is this is a really dangerous position, but you want to have the mindset that this is really dangerous for him too. What I want to do is pin this hand, and I can take this away using the same scraping block, that scraping disarm that we used before. Okay, it looks fancy, but it's really easy. Now in this case, he's straightening his arm, so I can get one of the classic elbow locks. What I'm talking about is somebody doing this, you know, where he's going to stick that pencil right through my eye. Okay, the first thing is I want to pin this wrist with this hand. So when I go like this, the trick is about where my elbow is. Now, cut me with that hand. I'm pinning it against my chest. I'm not using a lot of strength here. The trick is that I'm not using my thumb. As soon as I go like this, pull your hand out. Come on, there she goes. I use the same monkey grip as we do in ground fight, but if my elbow's up, now pull your hand out. Yeah, it's still gonna go. So I need to combine these two ideas that I'm pinning, gluing his whole arm against, my whole arm against my body. Now at the same time, once he threatens me, get that pencil in the eye, at the eye, that's quite commonly reported. I want to defend the target. In this case, let's say it's an actual blade, he's going to cut my throat. I want to pin and put this hand across my throat. Now, if something's gone wrong, I'm back in the same concept here where I can put the least vulnerable part, if you can use that term, close to the weapon, so I'm not getting the most vulnerable part. Do I want to get my arm peeled? No, but I'd rather have that happen than get my throat sliced open, because I'm not coming back from that one. So once I do these two things simultaneously, I'm set up for the same stripping block, or stripping disarm that I showed you earlier in the drill. It's going to come right out, and now we can trade sides here. Now it looks fancy, but it's really not, and it happens fast. Watch your neck as I do it. Okay, before he knows what's going on, I can have this weapon in my hand, and I don't have to move my body that much. This is really a good last stitch. Again, he's giving me different pressure here. I really want him up in close where his wrist is close to my body. When this happens, this is your first motion. Now try to cut. And I didn't have to use any footwork. I didn't have to use a lot of leverage. It's really that same principle that I can use the back of my hand. So we're using a training blade so that you can imagine where the edges are. If this is a shank, a fork, or the pencil, again, I'm not gonna have to worry about cutting my hand. But if it has an actual blade, look where my hand is. On the back of the blade. It never actually touches. I slide it down here and I make that stripping out. All right, so for drilling purposes, the same idea. Let's form a give and take drill. It gets you doing more repetitions. At first, it's okay to actually get a rhythm because it's hard to break rhythms. You tend to keep going and you end up doing a lot more repetitions. Later on, of course, you don't want to have rhythms. You don't want to have any kind of telegraphing. You want to make it more realistic, more spontaneous. But the idea is pretty simple. I start with this idea here that I'm going to stick the pencil through his eye. He pins it, the key points here, that his elbow's tight, it comes out. Then we switch positions while he switches grips. He does it to me. You know, I pin, I strip, and then I've got it here. We put him back in. I do this one. We got to make sure you pin it. Yeah. And there we go. Now it's actually harder to do this disarm and to drill it with a rubber knife. If this was a real blade, this works even slicker. The reason why it's a little harder, hold tight, is because there's flex in the blade. Hold really tight. You see how the blade is flexing? It still works, but that flex doesn't exist in a real knife, so it comes out even tighter. What this does is these are a series of disarms that we're going to see more of later with actual edge weapon, knife attacks. But we've already shown you a couple of versions of this stripping out kind of disarm. As disarms go, it's pretty good because it's protecting your hand. At any time I can abort, and depending how long the handle is, I can slide this right down to the handle. So I'm actually working on the handle right now, the knife, not the blade. And then as I turn out, even at full speed, you can see 8, 9 times out of 10, I get this right in my hand, and I'm ready to rock and roll before he knows whatever happened. Good. Hook my head. That's a good way to use the ice pick grip without using lethal force. He puts me in position, he switches his grip. Now again, it's a little low, but you know, that can happen. And we keep going back and forth so we get rid of them. And we don't stop, we don't talk about dinner. We talk about survival. Good. And we can go back and forth, getting a lot of reps in a lot sooner.